Yes, so today's shir will be L'Zecher Nishmas Simcha ben Marusa Miriam, whose yahrzeit was Shabbos Kodesh, Chafvav Tammuz, Tavshin Pei Gimel. So you're still...
I'm still in my...
Okay. You're still in your Shana and your Yud Beis Chodesh. Okay, should be on the Esna Shama. Okay, we're in Perek Tes in Inyanei Teffilah. Almost finished with the Perek. Yeah, so the last thing we had mentioned, we had looked at Sif Yud Gimel. Just to review the very last thing, we had mentioned that even though we say Tefillah takes the place of Korbanos, but Korbanos were only brought by Kohanim. Only Kohanim could do the Avodah. So maybe only Kohanim should daven. Why do we daven? Tefillah takes place of Korbanos, so a Kohen should daven. So he says like this. He says, B'etzem, the Korbanos are a chiyuv on all of Yisrael, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows the Kohanim to be our Shaliach. And it's a Shlichus though, it's a Madna Shlichus. It's a Shlichus where only the Shaliach is allowed to do the Avodah. I'm not allowed to. In fact, if a Zohar is a non-Kohen, does the Avodah, there's a chiyuv misa for that. Misa b'dei Shemayim, Hazor, Hakarev, Yumas. Ma'ashe'en kein Tefillah, which is something I'm allowed to do, Memela mechuyev. Now, you can't ask the kasha, oh, I'm not mechuyev in a Corban, therefore, why do I have to daven? The answer is, I am mechuyev in a Corban, Elamai, the Kohen is a Shaliach. So on Tefillah, I don't need shlichos, I got to do it myself. So I think I had mentioned as a kasha, just to go over this again, that this lashon, that the Kohanim are our shluchim, is actually a shaila in the Gemara itself. The Gemara has a shaila. Our Kohanim are shluchim, meaning the chiyuv is on us, and they're acting as our shaliach. Or fakert, a Kohen simply gets his power from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a shaliach of Shemayim. And the Gemara's maskana actually is, Kohanim are not our shaliach, because you can't make a shaliach on something that you cannot do yourself. Because shalichus means I give you whatever kayach. I want to be megarish my wife, so I have a kayach of gerushin. Actually, I shouldn't say it that way, but I say it in a third party. A person wants to be megarish his wife, so he has a kayach of gerushin. So he gives to the shaliach his kayach of gerushin. I want to be kind of something, so I give to you the kayach to be kind of for me. But something I can't do myself, I have no kayach to give over to you. So the Gemara says, this is not Stam B'Srah, the Gemara itself says, it's not shaykh for a Kohen to be a shaliach of Yisrael, because how can a Yisrael make a shaliach on something that the Yisrael himself cannot do? So because of this, the Gemara's maskana is bedafka the other way. Kohanim are simply shluchim of the Ribbanu Shalom. They are not shluchim of the Yisrael. So it's interesting that the Gaon is using here a tzad that the Gemara itself rejects. The lashon here is shlichusayu koavdinan. The Kohen is doing our shalichus in the Avodah, which is why we are mechuyav in Tefillah, because really we're mechuyev in Avodah. We're mechuyev in Avodah, but the Kohen is our shaliach. Memela l'gabei Tefillah, we say mitzvah bo. It's a bigger mitzvah for you than your shaliach. So that's a bit of a tzarachi, and I see that the well, it's interesting how these things are alluded to. Meaning the source of the Gaon's explanation is the Vilna Gaon's commentary on Tikkunei Zohar, and then it just says Ayin Nidarim Lamed Hey. Ayin. Check out Nidarim Lamed Hey Amid Beis. So, we would pass over that. I don't check every reference itself. I just happen to know Nidarim Lamed Hey Amid Beis is exactly the sugya where the Gemara says the opposite of what the Vilna Gaon says. So sometimes the word for ayin is a very powerful word. It's merames, that everything you just read is a tzarachian from another Gemara. So the Mechaber, the Ma'asef of these teachings, the Eben Shlomo, of Yitzchak Malson, or of Shmuel Malson was his father, of Yitzchak Malson was Meisef on it. I put in the Va'ayin just to be merames to the fact that the Gaon Svora is actually very difficult based on the Gemara in Maseches Nidorim. Okay. So bottom line basically is that we daven because the Chiyuv Avoda is on us, therefore the Chiyuv Teffilah is on us. And on Teffilah, we say better to daven yourself because Mitzvah ba Yaiser Mebishluchai. So it's interesting. What is the halacha taka if I can't daven? See, Tefillah is very, very unique. We have a special takana called Chazaras Hashatz. Right? The Chazan repeats Shemona Esrei. So why does the Chazan repeat Shemona Esrei? Well, there's the original reason, then there's the contemporary reason. The original reason was because there were people who didn't know how to daven. Remember, they didn't have Sidurim in those days. Right? So you didn't know the words. They didn't know the words. So Memela, the Chazan would be mitzi in Shemona Esrei those people who were not able to daven on their own. So let's ask a few questions here. So question number one is, so if I'm mamish and I'm oretz, I don't know how to read, I don't know the davening, so I can be, I'd say, with Chazaras Hashatz. Now that does require I stand up, and it also requires that my legs be together. In other words, I have to be Aimed the same way I would be standing in Shemona Esrei. So you can't use Chazaras Hashatz, let's say, to be Yaitse Yalav Yava. If I missed Yalav Yava, right, so I'm supposed to repeat Shemona Esrei. Right, so can I say, okay, well, I'll just wait. When the Chazan says Yalav Yava, I'll have Kavanah to be Yotze. No, it has to be an all or nothing, meaning you can only be Yaitse Chazaras Hashatz if you're being Yaitse the whole Shemona Esrei as Chazaras Hashatz. You can't be Yaitse the part that you missed. You missed something, right, etc. Now, L'maisa, it could very well be like this. It could be that if you missed Yalav Yavai, so instead of davening Shemona Esrei over again, you could be mechavein to be Yaitse the whole Shemona Esrei. So that's different than what I said. What I said you can't do is, you can't just say, I'll have kavanah for Yalav Yava. But if you'll have kavanah for the whole Shemona Esrei and you stand up with your feet together, mitzchila v'yad seif, so inachinami, you're Yaitse. Of course, what are you marviach? I mean, that's going to take you as long as just saying the whole Shemona Esrei, but Lamaisa, you could use Chazaras Hashatz for that particular inyan. Now, what about if a person is a baki? Like most of us, we know how to daven or we have a sitter. So can I just decide, hey, I'd like to have the chazan do it for me? In other words, can I just skip Shemona Esrei and say, I'll be Yaitse with Chazaras Hashatz? So l'chatchila, the answer is no, because Chazaras Hashatz was only a takana for an Eino baki. For a baki, we go back to the old idea, mitzvah bo yoser mebishlucham. You can do it yourself, you don't need a shaliach. But b'di'evet taka, you would be Yaitse. B'di'evet Chazaras Hashatz even works for a baki. Now one could ask interesting questions, because Lamashal, by Kiddush, we have a different rule. By Kiddush, the rule is that somebody can be Yaitse me in Kiddush, even if I'm a baki lagamri. Right? We don't say, oh, you could be Yaitse me in Kiddush only if I don't know how to say it. We say you could be Yaitse. And according to the Gra, by the way, it is preferable for the balabayas to be Yaitse people than for each person to do it by himself. Because he tainas, that's called Raivam Hadras Melech. By one person being Yaitse, it's Raivam. So you already see that Shemona Esrei is different than other things. By Shemona Esrei, we only allow Chazaras Hashatz for an Eino baki. A baki is not allowed to rely on Chazaras Hashatz, even though b'di'evet it would be good. By Inyanim of Kiddush, number one, for sure, an Eino baki can rely on it, and the Vilna Gaon says that's even better than doing it himself. Now, here's another nekuda. You can only say Chazaras Hashatz if there's a minyan. If, again, machlokas, does that mean you have to have, the chazan counts for one, for sure. Does that mean you have to have 9 people who are answering, or just 9 people in the room, and you can only have 6 people who are answering? All right, that's a machlokas. How do you count the minyan for Chazaras Hashatz. There are different shitas. If you need 9 people who are answering or just 6 people who are answering. But you need a minyan. If you don't have a minyan, you cannot do Chazaras Hashatz. Well, what does that mean? Let's assume I'm a guy who doesn't know how to read. And I want you to be mitzi me in Tefillah. L'chaira, unless it's a Chazaras Hashatz, you can't do that. So you see another idea, that the principle of Shemea Ka'ina, that works by Kiddush, it works by Havdalah, it works by benching. You could bench for me. It actually doesn't work by Tefillah. Tefillah is a special Yisaid. Only when there's a minyan, it's shaykh to be mitzi. So the Yerushalmi says, the idea is, that because Tefillah is Bakashas Rachamim, Me'ikar Hadin, it can't be done through Shalichus. Because every person has to do his own Rachamim. Elamai, but Tzibor, they were maker. So the idea of Shemea Ka'ina does not really apply to Tefillah the same way it applies to other mitzvahs. Because Shemea Ka'ina by Tefillah only works when you are in the getter of Chazaras Hashatz. It wouldn't work without a Chazaras Hashatz, meaning I cannot daven for you unless I'm a chazan in a minyan. So what does that lemaisa mean? So let's say a person cannot daven, he needs someone. So really the only eitzah is he has to repeat mila b'mila. In other words, I cannot daven for him. I say the words, he repeats the words after me. That's different than Kiddush. When I say Kiddush for him, he doesn't have to say the words, right? I say the words for him, and we have the principle, Shemeya, if you listen with Kavana, you're Yotze. But for Tefillah, it has to be Mila, Mila, B'mila. Which actually means, so the question is, let's say somebody cannot talk. Let's say somebody's mouth is shut. So l'chayra, there's not really a takana that I could daven for him. Because I cannot be mitzi in b'tefillah. He would have to be mitzi himself. So the only thing he'd do is he'd be saimech on hirhor. He's an einus, so his thinking of the words would be considered to be. So I could say the words, and his thinking, so he's not yaitse because of my amira. He's yaitse because of his hirhor. Now, I know semantically that's the same thing, basically, but it is a different process. It's not because my dibor is mitzi, it's because with the eved, he's yaitse with his machshava, where it's not shaykh for him to say it. So, by the way, we have the same story, even in Chazaras Hashatz Gufa, where when you have a minyan, I can be mitzi b'tefillah, but you'll notice meidim d'Rabbanan, right? There's when the chazan reaches meidim, so we say a paragraph of also thanking Hashem. So why do we say meidim d'Rabbanan? So the Svarim bring down the idea that when it comes to gratitude, you can't be yaitse with somebody else. Even if he's mitzing me and everything else, when I say thank you to Hashem, it has to come from me. Therefore, we have a separate nusach that the Tzibur says called meidim d'Rabbanan. Okay. Alrighty, so that's the Gain's Chiddush, that Kaihanim are our Shaluchim, and again, it is contradicted by the Gemara Nedarim. I don't have a teretz, but the one thing I'll tell you for sure is that the Gain would have a teretz, or did have a, I don't know if he did have a teretz or would have a teretz. I don't think that, we got the Vilna Gaon in Akasha, he forgot the Gemara Nedarim. I assure you that that is not what happens. Okay. We're up to Sif Yudalit. Masha Amru. The Gemara in Bracha says, Hamavakesh rachamim al chaverei ein tzarich lahaskir shmai. Yeah, this is very interesting, right? We often daven for people, usually because they're sick, but they could be for any reason. They could be in prison, they could be in trouble, right? So I daven for a person, and I say Tehillim for a person, and then I say Misha Beirach, either Reifei Chaylim. So the minhag is if a person is sick or a makam sakana, so that's when Ashkenazim are mevakesh in the name of the mother. So it'll be somebody ben the mother. If it's for parnasa or for reasons that are not connected to sickness or physical danger, so Ashkenazim have the minhag that they use the father. And so we use the mother for sickness or danger, and we use the father for other things. Many Sephardim use the mother in all tefillas because the mother is rachamim more, and therefore when you're mevakesh rachamim, you use the mother's name and the like. But the Gemara, but the big problem people often has is I don't know the person's name. I don't know his name, or even more so, I don't know the mother's name. I don't know the father's name, or the like, or the person is only uses an English name. Right? I know his name is George. I don't know if he has a Hebrew name or whatever it is. So what do you do? So Lamaisa, there is a Gemara that says when you're mevakesh rachamim on somebody, you don't need to use their name, at least if you don't know it. The Gemara says it, because Hashem knows who you're talking about. Meaning to say, it's not ma'akev mamish to use the name. So that's fine, but here the Gra says something very, very shver, and I don't understand this either. The Gra seems to say, the Gemara's lashon is, Eino tzorich lahaskir shmai. You don't have to mention his name, which could very easily mean if you know the name, you should mention it. If you don't know the name, it's still a tefillah. But the Gra gives a svara why it's better not to mention the name. And he says, Hatamhu, ki bazeh mekubal hatefillah yoser. A tefillah without a name might be more mekubal than a tefillah with a name. Why is that? She'ein ma'aynin alav. This way, the malachim in Shamayim are not going to check his records. The concept is, when you're mispalel for a specific person, and you mention the name, right? Let's say whatever it is, Yaakov ben Yitzchak, or Yaakov ben the mother. So the malachim go to the file cabinet, and they take out all the files about Yaakov ben Yitzchak, and they look through it to see what are the averos, what are the mitzvahs. And you have prosecuting attorneys called mekatragim who present the negative side of the case. Be'ezras Hashem, you also have meilitza yosher, but you got the whole picture. And chas v'shalom, I don't want the whole file to come out. I'd rather the file not come out. So the Gra says, apparently when you daven without a name, Hashem knows who you're talking about. But the angels don't know who you're talking about. So they don't go to the file cabinet. If they don't go to the file cabinet, you're totally at the mercy of God, so God will be neited to rachamim. I mean, God knows the whole file, but without the mekatragim, Hashem is neited to rachamim. And therefore, Itainas, there's a certain maila in a tefillah without a name, because that prevents Eon going deep into his din, because the Malachei HaShares don't take out the file, so you don't have the mekatragim. This is actually a very, very fascinating svara, but I mean, I don't get it. I mean, if this is the svara, it shouldn't just say you don't have to mention the name. It should say you shouldn't mention the name. Now, it's a davar pashat that l'chatchila you mention the name. I mean, that's ma'asim b'chol yom. L'chatchila we look for the name. So I don't see how this svara matches up with the l'chatchila that we use a name. According to this svara, we would tell the person, b'dafka don't use a name, and that way there's not going to be what's called an eon hadin. So we'll leave that as a question, but it is a little bit of a tzarech eon on the Gra. Once again, I have no problems that the Gra would have no problem answering this, but at least to hear, no teretz is presented to that. And yeah, what?
Ashkenazim asking to mention the name?
For sure, everybody does. I mean, when we pray for a chayla, we ask for the name. I mean, every Ashkenazim do that, Sephardim do that. So I'm just asking, according to this svara, it would be better not to ask for a name.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Someone mentioned to me
Yeah, what
the
did they
name
tell
of the Gra. I didn't know where it was until today.
Yeah.
Not to mention the name.
So you're saying maybe all right.
So at least I know one person who follows this.
So maybe that's, I'm going to check in the Ma'aser Rav. So that's the teretz. The Gra holds you don't mention it. Okay. that would fit. If that's what the Gra holds, then that fits beautifully this explanation. Lamaisa, we don't paskin like that at all. We vade paskin to mention the name. In fact, different gedolim at different times. It's very interesting. They had a ruach hakodesh, or a very extraordinary sensitivity, that when they would get a kvittel, they would get a piece of paper that says, please, no levakesh rachamim, because of this, they would look at it and say, are you sure this is the right name? Because they felt that they needed the right name to have a better channel to Shemayim, and if they could sense that their tefillah was being blocked in some way, it could be they had the wrong address, the wrong name, and the like. And unfortunately, there are. You'd be surprised how many people don't really know their name, or we don't know their name correctly, because they were named one thing at birth, and then later through life they go through things. The ksuba is one thing, and something else is another thing. And all right, spelling is less important. Spelling is very important, and again in the ksuba, in tefillah, as long as you pronounce the name, it doesn't make a difference if you spelled it with a samach or a sin. But names are a big issue. People often don't have the right names. Don't know your name. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly, but wasn't there a certain nation that disguised themselves as another nation in front of Klal Yisrael, so they were Vakesh Rachamim for the wrong?
Yep, that's correct. That's the Maisa with Amalek. It says that when Aaron HaKohen died and the Inyanei HaKavod scattered, so it says the Canaanim attacked us, and Moshe Rabbeinu prayed, may Hashem deliver this nation into our hands. So Rashi is masber from Chazal, these were not Canaanim, these were Amalekim. This is the second time Amalek attacked us. But Amalek knew that when they attacked us the first time, and Moshe was powerful against Amalek, Bnei Yisrael were Menatzeach, so they disguised themselves as Canaanim, so that Moshe would pray for victory from Canaanim, and it wouldn't be a valid tefillah against them. Moshe Rabbeinu apparently didn't know they were Amalekim, but he knew they weren't Canaanim. He knew they were they were disguising themselves, so he was mispalel to Hashem, deliver the nation to us, whoever it is. So you're right, and I think that's consistent with the Gra, meaning even if you don't have to mention the name, if you mention a wrong name, maybe it's worse. So that could explain the idea of a tois in the name. Yeah.
Could you explain what he was saying before about how certain or knowing to say the father's name versus the mother's name?
Yeah, so the concept is that since the mother normally, there are exceptions individually, but normally the mother is the more compassionate, feeling parent, even though we say in the Tehillim, Kerachim aval banim, that God's mercy is like the father's mercy, but the mother is associated with rachamim. So therefore, when someone is in physical danger, they are ill, they are sick, or they're in prison, or their life is in danger, so we want to be ma'orer, the maximum rachamim. So we invoke the mother's name, right? So that's why we look for the mother's name, and even if it's a ger, for example, his mother would be Basora Imenu. However, when it comes to Parnasa, so even though that's important, it's not that it's important, you also need rachamim, but it's not as urgent. So we go with the normal derech of father, but many Svardim hold, hey, if you need rachamim, you need rachamim. What's the difference if it's sakana or it's parnasa? So they use the mother's name in virtually all tefillahs. Not all Svardim, but many Svardim use the mother's name. What is your use the mother's name? Yeah. So that's a machlokes. Ashkenazim only use the mother's name. In fact, they never use the mother's name after the person is nifter. Once the person is nifter, so even if when you were praying while they were alive, you use the mother's name. Once the person is nifter, you go back to the father's name. Again, many Sfardim use the mother's name for a nifter as well. So these are chilukei minhagim. The truth is, you're allowed to use both parents' names. It's not so much the minhag, but in the modern Orthodox world, they always want to use both names because they always have to be equal. But the emphasis, even in the more traditional communities, some had the minhag on a matzeba, for example, to use father and mother. In other words, if one were to do that, it wouldn't be an accusation of modernity. There is a makam, a minhag, to use the father and mother's name in a matzeba. Okay, so this is the idea of shemus. We could talk a lot about names. I don't want to digress into names generally. Everyone knows Rav Chaim Kanievsky's famous Shita, that he was against, like virtually all the modern names. He says names have to be makubal in Klal Yisrael. You don't invent new names that are not based on Tanakh or whatever. So even things like Shira. Shira's a common name, I think, a relatively common name. He was absolutely against Shira, Zahava, like any modern name. He says you don't do those things. And he even told people they had to change their name. So a person named his daughter, it's a famous story, I don't know, who knows if it's true, but it may be true. It sounds like it might be true, that he named his daughter Shira because she was born the week of Shabbos Shira, Parshas B'Shalach. So he told Chaim, because my daughter is Shira. He says, why are you using Shira? What type of name is Shira? He says, well, she was born Shabbos Shira. So he said, so she was born Parshas Para. You would call her Para? What's that? He said, yeah. My guess is that probably is a true story. That Rav Chaim had a bit of a biting sense of humor.
Does everyone agree with that?
Sometimes. Again?
Is that all posts going to agree with him about Shira?
No. Nobody agrees with him. And what I'm saying is he was extraordinarily machmir on Shemais. Now, as Gedolim often said, they said, if Rav Chaim told you something, you better listen to it. Meaning like this. They didn't say every Maisa about Rav Chaim, everybody has to follow. But the Gedolim always said, if he said it to you, you better follow it. So another example would be growing a beard. He was extraordinarily machmir, that even a single person has to have a beard. So there was a mice about a guy from a Yekesha family, a frum family. He was not like a Choser B'Tshuva. He came from Dairis of religious Jews, but their minhag was that they didn't have beards. So he got married. Apparently he and his wife were struggling with fertility problems. And he went to Rav Chaim for a bracha, and Rav Chaim says, if you grow a beard, you'll have children. So apparently this was a very big issue for him. This was not the Messiah, his parents would hate it, whatever it is. He said, I'll do anything, I'll learn Shas, anything but that. Anything but that. Rav Chaim said, no. He says, you're not going to have children unless you have a beard. So the guy started crying. And Rav Chaim, so the children, Chaim's children, Chaim's family were saying, he's a man bitzar, like why is Abba, so cruel? So he says, Ein davar. I said he has a beard, he'll have children. He says, what's he bothering me? Whatever. He says, I'm not holding him back from anything, he'll have a beard, he'll have children. But ad kedei kach, I don't know, I don't know the end of the story. I don't know, is it the fact he didn't have a beard, didn't have children, or he had a beard, had children, I don't know. But ad kedei kach, the Rav Chaim, the guy was crying and the guy was begging, and this was a front person. It wasn't like, keep Shabbos and you'll have children. I mean, have a beard and you'll have children. He was, And Rav Chaim was very makbid. So he had certain hakpadas. And as Rav Steinman said to somebody, listen, you hear a maisa that Rav Chaim says you have to have a beard, that's not machayev you to do that. But if he said it to you, he says it would be very dangerous not to listen. So you have to be, and that's why the Yema says, this is a hadracha that people said, don't ask shilas of Gedolim unless you're ready to live with whatever they tell you. Okay? Meaning, if you're machlit that you won't be able to do a certain thing if you're told, then don't ask. If you don't ask, you're relatively safe, so to speak. You don't have a direct psak on you. Once you have a direct psak on you, you're kind of stuck, right? So if you don't know, if you're mesupik, what he'll tell you, and one of the studim, like you wouldn't be able to live with, then it's actually better not to ask the shaila in such as. This is already the realm of Ruach HaKodesh and Tzaddik Gozer, B'Kadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. So he had certain hakpadas about names, hakpadas about a beard. These were things that he was very, very strict. Now, Lamaisa, it's interesting that the Mekubalim of Italy, Italy had many, many great Mekubalim. Right after in fact, Italy was the first country after Eretz Yisrael. The Kabbalah of the Ari got to Europe via Italy, and then it spread to other countries. So one of the very famous Mekubalim of Italy, was not a direct Talmud of the Ari, but 2 generations removed, was Rav Menachem Azaria Mipano. Pano is the city in Italy. He's called the Ramah, Reish Mem Ayin, Mipano. You may have heard of him. He was a big Paisik also, but a very, very famous Makubal. Ramah Mipano. He wrote the Sefer Asar Ma'amaros, many other Svarim. And Ramah Mipano happened to also be very, very wealthy. He was a friend of Rabbi Yosef Karo. And in fact, he paid for the first printing of the Kesef Mishnah, and I believe maybe even the Beis Yosef. So he was a Gevir as well. He had Terek Dula B'Makam Echad. But later, there were other Italian Mekubalim. The Ramchal was an Italian Mekubal, although he lived in Amsterdam, then came to Eretz Yisrael. But the Ramchal is from Italy also. Luzzatto is an Italian name. So what's interesting is the Italian Mekubalim had a Messiah that you didn't grow. A beard was only shaykh to Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. It was like a chashuv inyan that when you're not in Eretz Yisrael, you're supposed to be megaleach the zaken. And therefore the Italian Mekubalim didn't have a beard. The Amami Pano, it is said, didn't have a beard. I think they say the Ramchal, until he came to Eretz Yisrael, the last years of life, did not have a beard. And this was the inyan of the Mekubalim. So since this does not fit the modern Haredi perception of how a Talmud Chacham is supposed to look, so they have paintings of Ramami Pano in which the beard was added on. You can see it was added on because the picture was without a beard. But what, you have a gadol without a beard? What's shaykh? So they just added the beard. Different things. Sometimes they have old Haggadahs that used to be illustrated with pictures of women. The women were not 100% Sneah, whatever it is. So they added different things to them and the like. Sometimes there were even Talmidei Chachamim who took the position that when they were not learning Torah, they didn't have to cover their head. Again, in halacha there were such shitas, so they added yarmulkes to the pictures later and the like. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his schools, his yeshivos, which had secular limudei chol, they had secular studies too. He says the students, the boys, did not wear yarmulkes for the secular studies. In the yeshiva gufa, they only had to have kisei araish.
Is there a reason for that? Because
I'm not sure. Unless they were, what's the big deal? I mean, you're in your own yeshiva. You're not going among the goyim. I'm not sure. It doesn't make sense to me because the cholapachas, the Taz already brings that it's a minhag Yisrael that Yidden do not go daled amais. It is a minhag, right? I mean, if yarmulke is a chiyuv, it's a chiyuv only because of minhag, meaning the only chiyuv is to cover your head when you're maskir shem shemayim. In fact, even learning Torah, it's not so pashat that you have to cover your head. Davening, when you say Shem Hashem, that's covered Hashem. But so why do we wear a kippah all the time? So the Taz brings down that it's a minhag Yisrael not to go daled amais without a rosh mechusa to remind yourself, of Yiras Hashem. In fact, even yarmulke, they say, is a bit of a garbled version. Yiras malka, to have reverence for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Melech. So why Rav would make a point of bedafka not wearing a yarmulke then? I don't know, unless there was anti-Semitism in the streets, but even then. So inside, what's the issue? I don't know. But it was interesting that there was such a hanhaga. So when they have pictures of the kids there who aren't wearing kippahs, the modern pictures, or the modern artists Photoshop it, they put in the key, right? So these are like a forgery with photographs and the like. And with women, I can go on with that too. Now, there are pictures of the Chavetz Chaim, a famous picture. The Chavetz Chaim is sitting outside of his house. Rav Elchanan Wasserman is with him. And there are women like in the group who are, there. And so when in some places, when they reprint the picture, they take out the women. They just take it out. I mean, they're not there anymore because it's not considered tznius. It was considered tznius, Bisman the Chavetz Chaim. Okay, so things change in some ways. For the better, not for the better, whatever. But there were things that were considered to be mutter at one time that Bisman has people are more machmer about. the idea of separate doorways for men and women for stores. There was no such thing, but okay, Seder. It could be, again, in defense of things, it could be like this. It could very well be that when society as a whole gets more degenerate and more precistic, so we have to go the other extreme, meaning you didn't need to go to certain extremes when society as a whole was more decent. Although I don't know, the drunken people in Ukraine, it's not the fact that society was so decent in those times either, but at least in tznius matters, there were higher levels of tznius there. For example, a married woman, a geisha married woman would generally not go out without her hair covered in a hat. So there was such a musig among goyim to cover. If you look at pictures of the American pioneers or whatever, the women always wore a bonnet or whatever. So it could be that on one hand people criticize the fanaticism of getting rid of women and all of that. On the other hand, to be melamed zechus, it could be in a generation of greater pretzis, we sometimes have to go to the other extreme, which we wouldn't have to go if society would be normal. I'll give you a mashal to this. In the 1950s, they did a survey of what were the biggest problems in public schools in America. So there was like kids chew gum in class, they have spitballs, they make paper airplanes. They're mafriya. Now, you go back to the 1980s, 1990s, and afterwards. It says, guns in school, bombs, no cocaine. You see the difference. There was a time the biggest problem was a spitball and chewing gum, and now it's, people bring in guns. And the a 6-year-old brings in a gun in first grade, a show and tell, Show and tell, here's a gun with, a loaded gun with bullets. This is the mishukas of society. Okay. So this could explain, as I said, because I know sometimes people are critical. I'm sometimes critical of all of the chumras that people take on, but there are svoras why it may be more necessary than it was at an earlier time. Okay. Now we have Tesvav, the last seif in the parak. Shnei dvorim b'korban. There are two aspects in Aveidas HaKorban. He calls it Shechita and Hakrava. Slaughtering the Korban and sacrificing the Korban. So actually, let me just comment a little bit more, because Hakrava itself is broken down. The way Chazal typically describe it, in every Korban there are 4 avodos that are done. The first avoda is Shechita. Right, Shechita. The second avoda is Kabbalah Sadam. A Kohen takes a bowl, a kli, a sanctified bowl, and as the blood spurts out of the animal, the Kohen is makabel the dam in a kli. Then the third stage, it could either be done by the same Kohen or a different Kohen, you can hand it, is holacha. Holacha means the blood is carried to the Mizbeach. Remember, typically, let's imagine this sefer is the Mizbeach. So the Shechita, let's say, of a Korban Ola is to the north of the Mizbeach, which is here. So there's Shechita, there's Kabbalah, then there's Holacha. The blood is brought in the direction of the Mizbeach. And then there is Zerika. The blood is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. Depending on the Korban, it's sprinkled in different ways. So the 4 Aveidos are Shechita, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zerika. Now, after Zerika, we then take a murim, we take parts of the korban. Well, in the case of an olah, we take all of the basar and we burn it on the mizbeach. In the case of other korbanos, we take the internal organs and fats, burn them on the mizbeach, and the meat is then eaten either by Kohanim or Yisraelim, depending on the korban. Now, of these 4 avodos of the blood, the first one, Shechita, can be done even by a non-Kohen. Shechita is kosher even for a Zohar. A Yisrael can shech the Corban in the Beis HaMikdash if he's Tahor. However, everything else, Kabbalah, Halacha, Zerika, can only be done by a Kohen. If a Yisrael does it, the whole Corban is pasul. Now, in the case of Halacha, you could fix it a little bit, meaning like this. If a Yisrael was makabel the blood, pasul. The Yisrael is zayrek the blood, pasul. If the Yisrael was mailech the blood, there is an eitzah of just going backwards, meaning if a Yisrael took the bowl and walked towards the Mizbeach, so what you could do is he should go back to where he started, give the bowl to the Kohen, and the Kohen can walk. So halacha is shayach, a tikkun. The other one's not. Yisrael was makabel for fallen. You can't reverse that. Now, the Gra calls those stages, the last three stages, the Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika, he calls that Hakrava. So in the word Hakrava, he's subsuming the last three stages. And Shechita is a stage b'fnei atzmai, presumably, although he doesn't say beferish, but presumably because Shechita is unique, because Shechita is Keshera Bizor. Right? Shechita is the only one of the Avodas in the Beis HaMikdash that can be done by a non-Kohen. Huh? Even the Chatchila. Shechita is even the Chatchila. Okay, so the Vilna Gaon says, therefore, in a Corban, we divide the Avodas into two categories. We have Shechita and Hakrava. So here's what he says. Hakrava hu neged Teffilah. The Hakrava, where I put the blood on the altar, we don't have a mikdash today. That's the Avodas HaTeffilah, where I kind of give my life and my heart and my blood and my soul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he already explained earlier that even though B'zman HaMikdash, that was Kohanim, but today we all do it. That he already said earlier. So what is Shechita Keneged? This is interesting. Shechita Neged Yisurim Shesayvel B'Galusa B'zman HaKorban. Very interesting. The Tefillah corresponds to the Hakrava of a Korban. But what corresponds to the Shechita of a Korban? The Shechita of a Korban are all of the sufferings that we go through in life as a kapara. Like we're shechted. Right? Shechita gives pain to the animal, right? It kills the animal. So therefore the notion is that just as a full korban needs shechita and hakrava, so we need in our lives the yisurin to purify us, to be machaper on us. Right? Chazal say that yisurin are a great, great kapara. Now yisurin, of course, can be anything. Yisurin can be, God forbid, the most severe things. Severe illness, destruction, poverty, devastation. Or Yisurin could be your coffee spilled a little bit, or you missed your bus, or you went into your pocket to pull out a 5 shekel thing and instead you pulled out a 2 shekel thing. You're frustrated, whatever it will be. So, in fact, that's one of the eitzes, how a person shouldn't get upset. In Eretz Yisrael B'frat, we live a life where we constantly have small yisurin, let's say. Missing the bus, it's hot, There's always things to be grouchy about. Can I speak from my own experience? I want to get a soda and 100 soda machine's broken again, So, you get upset, right? I shouldn't be so revealing. You get upset. But what's the pshat? You realize that fakert, every one of these things is a kapara from Hashem for our averis. And if Hashem in his rachamim says, my kapara is I don't get change from the soda machine, instead of chas v'shalom, something that could be a lot worse, a person can actually cultivate the attitude that Chazal called be sameach b'yisurim. It doesn't mean I rejoice, suffering, but I rejoice because I'm makir that this is a kapara from the Ribbanu Shalom. So the Gra says that's part of your korban. That's the shechita part. The Shechita is the Yisurin. The Hakrava is the Tefillah. Now, granted, it doesn't always fit the chronological sequence because normally Shechita precedes. I mean, here, you're davening, you get your surah. In other words, it's not always going to be in the order of Shechita Tefillah, but he's making the point that in human existence, there are going to be these two halakim, each of which is part of the Corban idea. The Yisurin are the Shechita, and the Tefillah, I bring my heart and soul to Hashem, is the Hakrava, I'm sacrificing myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore the Yisurin are part of Avodas Hashem. They tell the Maisa, I believe it's a Maisa from the Arizal, I'm not sure, I'm not sure, maybe of the Rishash. No, there are two Rishashes you need to know about. Maybe Sfardim are more familiar with one, Ashkenazim are more familiar with one, so I'll be sure everyone knows the two Rishashes. One Rishash is familiar to people from the back of the Gemara. In the Vilna Shas, we have Rav Shmuel Strashon, who lived at the time, he lived in the middle of the 1800s. He was a very wealthy family, and there were also great Talmidei Chachamim. And because he was in Vilna, so he got, basically, the Matfisim of the Vilna Shas gave a lot of priority to Talmidei Chachamim in Vilna to get their Chidushim in. So that's why there are so many. If you just look at, actually in the modern Shas, you don't appreciate this so much. Because what Oz V'Hadar did is, actually it's very useful. Instead of keeping all the Meforshim separate, they mixed them all together. But if you look at an older Shas, you see you have, the Rishas, the Rishas they do keep separate, but you see that each parish is separate. Now that's harder to use because you got to look here and look here and look here and look here, but bibliographically, it's more fascinating because you get to see where everybody's from. So if you look at a Vilna Shas, and all Shasim today are offsets of the Vilna Shas, you'll see disproportionately that so many of the Chachamim are people of Vilna, because once again, they had an in with the printers, they got their Chidushim in. So, of course, I'm not saying, of course, they're deserving, but this is why, they all got in. So the Rishash is Rav Shmuel Strashin, and he has Chidushim on every Masechta of Shas. And somebody made a cheshbon, I didn't do this myself, but I read that there's only 4 dafim in all of Shas where he doesn't have a ha'ara. Every daf of Shas, he has something to say. 4 dafim, somehow he didn't have anything to add. I don't know why. I don't even know which 4 dafim, but somebody went through it, and they said there are 4 dafim. Okay, so that's the Ashkenazi Rishash. But there's an earlier Rishash, Rav Sholom Sharabi, a Teimani, and he's also called Rishash, and he was a great Makubal. So you might find Siddur. He has Siddurim with Kavanos, Al-Pi Kabbalah. Every word has pages and pages of Kavanos. This is the Siddur of Rishash. The Rishash is one of the great Mekubalim, and don't confuse him with the Ashkenazi Rishash, Rav Shmuel Strashin. Now, the Kabbalah, so the Maisa I'm going to tell you is either from the Arizal himself, or it might be the Rishash. I don't remember, the Kabbalistic Rishash. But the story goes that a man was suffering tremendous Yisurin. All sorts of things were happening. So he wanted to go to the Ari or the Rishash for a bracha, for a tikkun, for some way to take these things away. And there was a big line of people waiting to see, so he had to wait in the hallway. So he's sitting on a bench, and he falls asleep. And all of a sudden he has a dream that he's in a room, and he's surrounded by figures in white and figures in black, fearsome figures. These are angels. He doesn't know what it is and what's going on. And he asks one of them, what's going on? He says, oh, well, you're being judged. This is after your death, and you're being judged. And the white are all the mitzvahs that you did. Pirkei Avos says you do a mitzvah, you create a defense attorney, a sanegar, you do an avera, you have bakatragim. So all of your people on both sides are, not people, all of your angels, they're gathering together. So now the person got pretty more interested, and there's a gigantic scale, a balance scale, where the white ones get on one side of the scale, and the black ones get on the other side of the scale. So for whatever reason, the black ones are going on first, so he's very scared because he sees us going down, down, down on the side of the bad. But then, Baruch Hashem, the cavalry arrives, and the white ones come, and they add, the Torah, the Mitzvahs, the Ma'asim Tovim. Baruch Hashem, things are getting better. The black was, so heavy, it was weighed up. It's getting higher and higher, which is good, right? It's getting good. But not quite. Still, the black is heavier. And then the final group that comes are the Yisurim that he suffered. In other words, the first group of white were the mitzvos, and the second group of white were the Yisurim, and that's even better. So the black is getting higher and higher and higher, the Yisurim. And then what happens was, it's not high enough. So he shouts in his dream, more Yisurim, I need more Yisurim. I have to get it up there. Get the black up there. And, he's saying it out loud. And at that point, the Shamash comes to him and says, the Rebbe is ready to see you now. He says, I don't need to see him. I have my answer. He says, I have my answer. I shouldn't ask you, take it away. I see. Min HaShamayim, they showed me the tayelas of what this was. Again, it's either a Maisa with the Arizal or the Rishash. I'll try to check exactly right. This is the notion of Shechita. So now the Gra says a beautiful pshat. V'zeh she'omru Shechita k'sheira bezor. Wow. A homiletical pshat. Shechita is kosher, even bezor, even by a non-Kohen. The ultimate Zohar are the goyim that persecute us. So he says, your Shechita, your Yisurim can come from the goyim. They can come from all of these things. It's still kosher. It's still a valid Yisurim. Your Yisurim don't have to come from your Rosh Hashiva giving you Musar. The Yisurim can come from the street gangs. They can come from the Arabs. They can come from the terrorists. They do. And that's the pshat, Shechita Gesheira Bazar. Mash Enkein Hakrava. Hakrava can only be done by a Kohen. So for that means for us, it can only be done by the Yisrael that comes to Hashem with a pure heart. So the Shechita is Gesheira Bazar. Everything else requires a Kohen who is dedicated to serve Hashem, which includes a Yisrael that purifies his heart. Right? So again, this is from the Graz Perish on Tikkunei Zohar. Let me digress for a little bit. I spoke about this to the center, but let me just mention just a little bit of the structure of Zohar, Tikkunei Zohar, just so you know what it is. The Zohar as a whole, and again, we're Makabel, it's from Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, some say some things were added later. That's not so nogea to us, but I just want to talk about the Zohar as it is. So the Zohar starts off, the main body of the Zohar is like a medrash, albeit Kabbalistic, on the Parshias. There's a Zohar on Bereshis, a Zohar on Lech Lecha, Vadayach, Lech Lecha, Vayera, a Zohar on the Parsha, right? And the Tzura of the Zohar is like a medrash, and indeed, interestingly enough, around 60 or 70% of the Zohar can be understood on the level of medrash. Now, medrash is hard also. Not everything in Zohar is sod. In fact, Rav Daniel Frisch, Zichrono Livracha, a great Makubal who was the Mechaber of the Perish and the Zohar called Mosuk Midvash, you may have seen it, actually put out 11 volumes called Niglais HaZohar, in which he takes out from the Zohar those parts that are Nigla, that are non-Kabbalistic. You could read like a medrash. And he explains. So it's 11 volumes. That's around half of the Zohar, maybe 60% of the Zohar. Now, however, interspersed in the Zohar are like separate Masechtas. Right? The Zohar is like a Shas, which has Masechtas. So the Masechtas have their own names. The Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd, about Moshe Rabbeinu. Safra Ditzniasa, Idra. These are like separate kuntresim that are in the middle of the Zohar. And what's a little even more confusing is that we don't know exactly who organized the Seder. That's not from Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the actual Seder of the things. That these kuntresim are split up. So for example, Raya Mehemna is not in all one place. You could be reading the Zohar on one parsha, and there'll be then a paragraph that's called Raya Mehemna. And then maybe 5 parshios later, there'll be another paragraph called Raya Mehemna, which means these were originally part of one kuntras, But different editors, we assume they were Gedalim, split it up to connect it to the main Zohar on the Parsha. Okay, so when you see Raya Mehemna, Safra Ditzniasa, Idra, Yanuka, and the like, these are like separate Masechtas or Kuntresim in the Zohar, some of which are printed biyachad, and some of which are actually cut up and interspersed throughout the Zohar. Now, all of that is in the body that's called the Zohar. But then in addition to the Zohar, we have something called Zohar Chadash. Right? Zohar Chadash. So what's Zohar Chadash? A new Zohar? In other words, somebody wrote a new Zohar. So the emphasis, I guess, you have to understand, Zohar Chadash is the same as Zohar Yashan. It's the same thing as the old Zohar, but it's only called Chadash because it was not circulated in manuscript until later, meaning the Zohar first got circulated in the 1200s, and then a few decades later, more Zohar came out. But we believe we're Makabel. It's also from the same Zohar. It's only called Chadash simply because it didn't come out until, it was not circulated, it was not Meforsam until later, but it would still be from the Rashbi, it would still be of Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, there was one attempt to actually write a new Zohar, and this was the Ramchal. The Ramchal actually wanted to write a new Zohar based on his Giloyim of Eliyahu Hanavi. But I believe he burnt it. He wrote some of it. He destroyed it, whatever it is. But that would be quite daring, essentially, not to replace the old Zohar, but to supplement the old. I mean, it's like somebody saying, I'm going to write a new Gemara. You know, to be a little unusual. And the Ramchal got in trouble. He was threatened with excommunication, threatened with cherem, all sorts of inyanim. And actually, there was a cherem. He was ordered. He was not allowed to teach Kabbalah. Which was a tragic thing. But on the other hand, you see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu works. Because he was not allowed to teach Kabbalah, he was forced to do things that were not officially Kabbalistic. That is why we have the Mesilas Yesharim, the Derech Hashem, and the Das Tvunas. The Ramchal's Iker writing was very heavy Kabbalah. And we have many Sfarim of Ramchal and Kabbalah. It's precisely because he wasn't allowed to do it that we have the Sfarim that are in his Pashut in Klal Yisrael. It's an amazing thing. In other words, of course, ultimately he has the last word because in the Mesilas Yesharim, Derech Hashem, and Das Tvunas are totally Kabbalistic, although they're not written in Kabbalistic language. So essentially, he had the genius of taking Kabbalah and being able to write it non-Kabbalistically. That's a big talent. He didn't use the Kabbalistic vocabulary. Mesilas Yesharim for sure. He does not use Kabbalistic terminology. Derech Hashem, a little bit more, Das Tvunas more than that. But still, they are written in non-Kabbalistic Eifanim to make it accessible to people. Okay, so that's the Zohar Chadash. Now then, there's a third part of the Zohar called Tikkunei Zohar. Tikkunei Zohar is also part of the Zohar, but it goes by a separate name. And this is 70 explanations on the word Bereshis. You have one word of the first word of the Torah. And all of them involve ways to rectify the Shechina that is somehow negatively impacted by Averos and by Tuma. And therefore the Tikkunei Zohar is devoted to Tikkunim of the Shechina. Now, the reason I'm bringing this out is, you'll see in all of the Sfarim that Nefesh HaChaim and even the Even Shelaima, and in fact the Gra did not write a parish on the whole of the Zohar. The Gra wrote a parish on Tikkunei Zohar, plus the Safra Ditzniasa. That Tikkunei Zohar especially is a very, very major source for how I should behave, my tshuva, my ma'asim taivim, because since it's about tikkun, it's about the rectification of pagam. It focuses on what I can do to be masaking the pagamim of sin in the world. And that's why in Sifrei Musar, when they draw from Zohar, you will find disproportionately that they're using tikkunim, because tikkunim is, above all, about tikkun. And tikkun is the opposite of shvira. Shvira comes from sin. Tikkun comes from tshuva and tefillah, and perfecting yourself in various ways. That's a little hakdama, so you know the difference between Zayar, Zayar Chadash, and Tikkunei Zayar, and then within the main part of the Zayar, the Kuntrasim, Raya Mehemna, Safra Datin. There are 20 or 30. There are quite a lot of these little Kuntrasim in the middle of the Zayar Parsha. You learn during the Parsha in the middle of the Raya Mehemna or something, whatever it would be. Okay, wish you all a Namastika Kabbalah Satira Bi'ava. We should be Zaycha, Ki Ish Yachud V'Levachad. Again, obviously everybody knows that the yeshiva suffered a tremendous loss with Rev Rockmill, Zechreinu Livracha. I don't know how many of you had a shaykhus with him, but those of you that had the shaykhus certainly lost a tremendous Rebbe, and those who didn't have shaykhus lost even more, didn't have the chance to be nishba by him. But the concept is when a great person leaves the world, there is a cholo, there's emptiness, there's a vacuum. There was something that he was putting into this world that is not in the world anymore. Emptiness. So what do you got to do? Every person has to resolve to try to fill up a little bit the emptiness that was created. So none of us as individuals maybe could be mamala everything that he did, but we take on a little bit, care about each other more, greater Abbas Yisrael, and Achrayas for Bein Adam L'Chaveira, for caring about people, for growing in Torah, for looking for the emes, and in that way we'll give him an Ilui Neshama, and we'll also learn from him and fill the emptiness that his Patira created. So.